What is going on, all you wonderful A-Plusers out there? It is I, Stuart, here once again with another Stargirl review, this time taking a look at Season 3, Episode 3, Blackmail. Alright, so let's go ahead and get into this episode and break it down, but before I really get into this episode, I just gotta point out this really cute Easter egg right here, having Joe McKill, or is that his name? But the actor who plays Starman, who was also in Community, having him in front of a sign that says Community Coffee, and, obviously I think it was to set up the scene where he gets coffee, but at the same time, I feel like him in front of a sign that says Community had to have been on purpose, so, I think that was a pretty funny Easter egg. But actually continuing into the scene, we find out that Starman is currently trying to find a little bit of balance in his life, which was suggested to him by Courtney Whitmore herself. And while doing so, he's at a diner and he has a talk with Yolanda. And I actually really like this exchange between the two of them because Yolanda asks the obvious question that, you probably would think she would ask, which is, what would Ted Kord think of me right now as the new Wildcat? And something he says that I found really interesting is that he would like the fact that she isn't very trusting of Cindy and that she, always has her guard up, and that's very much something that Ted Grant himself would have done, which is very true, not only in the comic books, but even in the show. Within some of the flashbacks that we've seen, we definitely kind of get that vibe from him. But we see from Starman that he's basically just trying to get a life outside of being Starman, which is hard for him because that's literally all his life has ever been. He's always just been Starman. So him trying to figure out who he is, what he can do with his life going forward, that's basically where his struggle is at the moment. We then cut to Rick and Beth, kind of just having a casual conversation. Rick kind of saying that he's a little bit jealous of the fact that Beth's parents are totally cool with her being with her being Dr. Midnight. And then as this is going on, though, we suddenly have a message basically being sent to Beth's goggles, and we don't know who it's being sent from at the moment that this is happening, but we find out that it's basically information that the gambler was blackmailing the Crocs. And then very next scene, we find out exactly who it was. We find out that it's Cindy, who has somewhat jailbroken the laptop, but not fully, as we kind of get like a funny scene later on where she's trying to hack into one specific part of the laptop, but it gets kind of like the message of wrong password, try again. And it very much kind of reminds me of the you didn't say the magic word from Jurassic Park. Anyone who's ever seen Jurassic Park probably knows what I mean there. But then we cut to school, and we get Courtney basically delivering the news to Cindy about the Crocs being blackmailed, and Cindy trying to act surprised but doing a really bad job of it, but then being able to play it off as, well, I wasn't really that surprised, everyone's blackmailing someone. So later on during this conversation, what also kind of comes up is, Courtney mentioning that Starman needs to find balance in his life, but then Sydney kind of mentioning that she hasn't really found balance in her own life, which is partially true, and that was kind of a big thing with Stargirl Season 2. Is there was like a good period of time where it was her trying to figure out, a good balance between being Courtney and then being Stargirl. And one of the things that kind of helped anchor her down to being Courtney was none other than Cameron. But unfortunately with Cameron right now, we still as an audience don't really know where he's at, like in terms of not only his powers, but in terms of what he knows. So when Courtney is like talking to him, he's giving her the silent treatment, and we don't fully understand why at the moment. Now, I'm going to be totally honest, and this is why I'm going to get most of the Cameron stuff out of the way here. I think the Cameron portion of the episode was probably the worst written part, and not because it was bad, like story-wise. I just think it had some of the worst dialogue and worst directing, and probably even to an extent the worst acting that we've seen in a show like Stargirl, and it just comes off as super awkward and forced, and at times like it almost feels like it's supposed to be like a very inappropriate metaphor at times. So I'll get a little more into that because I just want to get the Cameron stuff out of the way. Now, something I will point out is that the way his storyline kind of wraps at the end of the episode, I actually thought was really cool, and I'll get to that when I wrap up this review. But starting with his interaction with his teacher, he has his teacher who's of course reaching out, trying to help, and he, says he's fine. She of course says, it's okay to talk to people, and then he kind of says it a little more aggressively. He's like, I said I'm fine. And then you have this moment between Rick and Cameron, or Rick is getting Cameron to apologize to her after he already did, and just this scene is just so awkwardly directed, and it's just this weird dick waving contest between Rick and Cameron, of Rick just trying to threaten him for, you know, being kind of rude, and Cameron being like, I said I was sorry, like back to him. And it comes off as like Twilight fan fiction that was being adapted into a porn parody. It was just really awkward to watch, and what makes it worse is kind of like how it ends, because something cool happens, which is that Cameron, you know, we finally get to see him kind of using his power, and he uses his power to basically shoot a load of an icicle stick, essentially, onto Cameron's car, and then the next day he's totally fine, and he apologizes to Courtney, and it's so hard not to make a masturbation joke out of that. But yeah, so the Cameron stuff was not very well done in this episode, I don't think. And again, I think the exception is when it comes to the end of the episode, and I'll definitely get to that when I get there. But going back to the Starman storyline, I do love the speech that you essentially have the mechanic giving Starman, which is, you know, Starman has a lot of good things kind of going for him. He's just not really looking into it. And there was like a lot more to it, basically. And it's but at the end of the speech is basically how like people will throw away something so good and not realize it. So he's basically kind of using that as a metaphor for Starman to not throw away the opportunity that he really has, you know. And I do like that he has Pat to kind of back him up through this. We then kind of go to the cafeteria where the JSA are having their, you know, usual lunch meetings. And I'm actually kind of liking that we get these at least once an episode now. Like, we got a few of them during season 2 and then a couple during like season 1. But now it seems to become kind of like an episodic thing at this point. Like, much like how the Flash always wears his costume at least once an episode, it feels like we always have a JSA meeting in the cafeteria at least once an episode during this season. And I like that. That's something I am totally down for. But that being said, what kind of goes on here is they're all kind of wondering how they should deal with the Crocs, and they all pretty much are in agreement that there's a good chance that they're guilty. You know, Courtney and Beth, who of course are kind of the more optimistic ones when it comes to like innocent until proven guilty, even they seem to be leaning more towards the side of them being guilty. However, they still want to do things right, especially when they look over at Artemis and realize, you know, if they're gonna do this, if they're gonna take down the Crocs, they have to be sure about it, because otherwise they're just taking her parents away for no reason. And and, you know, that's just something that that no kid should ever have to go through. So that's something that they want to look into every option before taking the most drastic steps. At least most of them do. Not Cindy, on the other hand. She gets the bright idea to just tell Starman about it immediately, which the entire team avoided doing because they knew Starman would just, you know, rush into things without actually trying to look into anything or talk things through. And luckily Mike overhears this, and something I gotta give a shout out to. Okay, so Mike doesn't have very much screen time in this episode. He's here for like a couple of shots, but what I do like is that in the shots we do see him in, I do like that the show has shown us like a lot of growth that he's gone through, because if this was season 1 or 2, you know, I almost feel like Mike would have tried to either join Starman or tried to, like, you know, do his own angle, have his own angle with this, like, you know, well, like in the way of him thinking, since he's not part of the JSA and he's part of his own team, he would go about solving this his own way. But here, even though like we have him and Jakeem still wanting to do their own team, be their own, like, you know, team of superheroes, we still have him doing the responsible thing, and that is to call Courtney immediately after this happens. So bravo on the writers for kind of like showing us that growth. But we then cut to the grocery store, which is where it all goes down, which we kind of like saw in the trailer. Now in the trailer, I kind of assumed this was going to be a small part of the episode, and that like it wasn't going to amount to too much. It was just going to be a small fight. But no, this ended up actually being a pretty epic tokusatsu style like wire fu battle. A lot of cool wire work with some good choreography, over the top, in a good way. Just an overall really fun fight scene. But then it kind of takes a dark turn like towards the end of it, as like Starman starts basically kicking both of their asses at the end, especially like, you know, with the staff basically kind of doing a like, let's be honest here, when it comes to the fighting between Starman and Stargirl, the staff does like 90 or, you know, 95% of the work. But regardless, we get to like kind of the end of it, and it almost looks like he's about to just straight up finish them off pretty much. But thankfully that's that's when we get Pat coming in his stripe outfit, and yeah, of course he comes and tells Sylvester to stand down. And the very next scene, we finally get the Crocs kind of confessing that yes, they were being blackmailed, but they didn't kill the gambler. They wanted to though, but you know, the biggest thing was that they care about their daughter and they don't want to like go back to prison. They don't want to put their daughter through that. We also do finally get an explanation as to how it is that like they're not back in prison, and that is that there's just like a legal loophole. They don't really explore too much with the legal loophole or anything. They just say there's a legal loophole and that's why they're out of prison. You know what, it's a comic book world, so I'll accept that, you know. At least unlike Titans, they actually give us an explanation, whereas like you get a show like Titans where Dick Grayson, and I'm not talking about Nightwing, I'm like literally talking about Dick Grayson, whose name is now publicly known, you know, because he's now broken so many federal laws, and he just walks into a police station and is deputized in season 3. So, you know, we don't have anything like that here. Here, at least, there's some bit of an explanation as to why it is that no one's arresting the Crocs, you know? Yes, I just used that as an excuse to shit on Titans again. I apologize to all of you Titan fans out there. I know that show has its fan base, and who knows? Maybe I'll like season 4 when it comes out. Who knows? But going back to Stargirl, Starman is not happy at Pat for basically standing up to him and basically defending the Crocs, and he just thinks that the way he's been handling everything, like Pat's gotten too soft. But I really like how Pat just kind of, you know, he doesn't try to argue back at Starman. He talks to Starman almost like he's become kind of the father figure for Starman, and this is where things get kind of fascinating for me, because Pat, you know, it's really cool to see how much he's grown since season 1, that he, you know, is still the same, you know, really friendly guy that we got to know in season 1, but he sticks up for himself a lot more, but he's never like aggressive about sticking up for himself. And I really love the speech that he gives. He tells Starman basically why it's important to be a good role model for Courtney, because she never had a good father figure in her life, and that's what they need to be, you know. So Sylvester can't just be like this older brother figure, kind of like what I brought up in the previous episode, that theme of you know, being like, you know, whether or not you want to go out of your way to be someone's father figure, the thing is, if you're someone that someone looks up to and you're living in their house, they're going to look up to you, and you have to be a good role model for them, because they're going to see you as kind of a father figure in a way. And that's the speech that, you know, Pat kind of gives to Starman. He tells Starman about her own dad and how much of a piece of shit that guy was. So it's a really good moment, and probably like the highlight of the episode for me, for sure. But then we cut back and we see that Cindy apologizes for telling Starman about it, and Courtney, you know, seeming very serious, you know, just says, if you do something like this again, you're off the JSA. We then finally get like more Courtney and Cameron, which is something that we haven't seen since season 2, and something I love about the scene, and I don't know if it was done on purpose, but it's basically just the two of them going on a walk, and neither of them are really saying anything. And I thought that was kind of brilliant, because neither of them, what could either of them really say to each other at this point? Like I mentioned earlier, we still don't know how much Cameron knows about Stargirl and the JSA, and we still don't know how much Stargirl, or how, and even Stargirl doesn't know how much Cameron knows, not to mention the lies that Cameron was probably fed about the JSA. So the fact that they're both kind of like in this position where they don't really know what to say to each other, because they're both doing their own things that they really can't like let each other in on, it's to me like a really brilliantly directed scene, and just a really good moment. And unfortunately it ends with Cameron's powers kind of acting up again, and him having to basically leave Courtney, you know, the same way that he complained about her leaving him in the previous season. But that said, it is cool that they are finally starting to develop their relationship, even if it's, you know, just baby steps in this case. But, you know, regardless, I'm all for it. I really hope, like, here's the thing, I'll get into like some of my predictions later, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Cameron also could have been the one to kill the gambler. Now, do I think he killed the gambler? Probably not. I got my own theory on that, and I'll get to that at the end, but I'm also going to talk about why Cameron is a huge possibility for being the killer of the gambler as well. Now, we get one more shot, which is basically showing that all of Blue Valley, reminding us basically that Blue Valley is being surveyed, and we see someone surveying the monitors, and, you know, I think a lot of people are theorizing, myself including, that this person that we see looking at all the monitors is actually Mr. Bones. But we then cut back to Starman, and he at this point is feeling like he wants to be useful, but he also wants to start following the rules better. So he leaves the house but doesn't take the staff with him, which unfortunately ended up being the biggest mistake he could have made, unknown to us and him. But he arrives basically at the crime scene to kind of reinvestigate, and it's here that he's attacked by another creature, just as we cut to Pat, who's actually, at the moment that this is going on, making a new costume for him. Now, we don't see who attacked him, but we see that whoever it was someone big enough to throw him in the air, and when he came down and crashed, it almost looks like he could be dead. Now, I hope not. I don't think he's dead, but at the same time, you know, the show really likes to throw us some curveballs, so I wouldn't doubt it. And speaking of curveballs, I'm going to go into my top 3 suspects of who I think could have killed the gambler. So number 3, of course, is Starman himself being attacked here, but at the same time, I don't really think that's exactly where they're going, because I feel like in a few ways that would have been a little bit too obvious, but my reason for thinking like he could have done it, you know, and why he's like also at the bottom of my list is, again, we kind of see this darker side to Starman within this season, and so him killing the gambler really doesn't seem that out of left field for him. And then the whole him going back to the crime scene, that seems like a very cliche thing that you see killers doing a lot, like, oh man, did I miss any pieces of evidence? And you think what they're talking about is any evidence that they could look for and use to help with the investigation, but then it turns out what they actually mean is any evidence that they left behind that they can then pick up. So that's why he's my number 3, is simply him going back to the crime scene. But my number 2 is Cameron, and the reason Cameron is my number 2 is because we do hear that there was a stab wound in the gambler, but no weapon or anything to really show what stabbed him. And you know what weapon, you know, kind of goes away after it can be used as a murder weapon? Icicles. That's why they're used as a murder weapon a lot, because they, you know, they turn into water, and therefore it's a weapon that usually goes undiscovered sometimes. So Cameron's my number 2 suspect. But I feel like story-wise, it doesn't make as much sense. Plus, usually murder mysteries show us who the killer is in the first episode. And since Cameron wasn't in the first episode, that's kind of my biggest reason for thinking it's not him. Now, my number 1, the number 1 person who I think could have actually killed the gambler. And this is going to be one that I know that a lot of people are going to find controversial, and no one is going to probably chime in on this one. I'm going with Pat Dugan at the moment. And the reason I'm going with Pat Dugan, I think Cindy not telling the group who it was that killed the gambler is the main thing that makes me think it was Pat Dugan. Now, I don't think he killed the gambler on purpose. Let me put that out there. I think whatever the explanation is as to why and how he killed the gambler, it's going to be something that ends up it's going to be something that ends up having us sympathize with Pat and realizing that maybe there wasn't another way at the moment. But my biggest thing is that they're making Pat out to be like way too perfect this season. And on top of that, Cindy keeping this from the JSA would make a lot of sense if it turned out to be Pat, because, you know, he's someone that the entire JSA looks up to. And for them to suddenly have to see him in a whole new light, I feel like that's something Cindy wouldn't want to do to them. So right now, Pat's kind of my number 1 choice. The other thing too is that he's really building Starman up to be like a father figure to Courtney, and more than likely to Mike going forward, because he thinks there's a chance that he may not be around soon, because Pat isn't exactly the kind of person that would resist arrest, or heck, I mean, I could even see him turning himself in at some point if this is the direction that the show goes with it. So currently, my number 1 suspect is Pat Dugan. But of course, at the end of the day, these are just my A+ opinions. I always want to hear what you guys have to say. So if you guys have any other suspects as to who you think it was that killed the gambler, please let me know in the comments below. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel. But of course, guys, as always, just remember to keep it A+, and I will talk to you all later.